的 single malt，因为上面有标年份。那它用的桶型的变化就是运用了全新的美国橡木桶，但是它并不是炭烧桶，它是烘烤桶 （toast）。
In the Jim Murray Whiskey Bible, this went one better than Sonalta. This won the World Whiskey of the Year.
所以这一款Elenta 呢，又比 PX 的获得的奖项又更重要了，因为Sonata PX 拿到的是苏格兰年度最佳，但是 Elenta 是拿到全球年度最佳威士忌。
And I was highly pleased with this because we'd already won it twice for Ardbeg 10 and Ardbeg Ugadal, so it was nice to see Glenmorangie winning.
所以Elenta 得奖呢，对我来说我是非常高兴的，因为在Elenta 得奖之前，阿贝10年得过了一次 ，Ugadale 也得了一次。那大家可能会犹豫说啊，是不是阿贝做的比格兰杰好？还好这一支有得奖，表示格兰杰也很好。
So when it was introduced, the sales of Elenta were quite slow to start with.
当初 Elenta 发表之后的销售，其实算是平稳，慢慢的顺的在卖。
But then when it won World Whiskey of the Year, it just disappeared. It's all gone.
当威士忌圣经一发表是年度全球最佳威士忌的时候，瞬间市场上就找不到了。
I was in San Diego in California about 5 weeks ago.
基本上我大概5周之前的话，我是在加州的圣地亚哥。
I found an obscure, very small liquor store, and I found 3 bottles of Elenta.
在圣地亚哥的一个小酒庄里面呢，被比尔博士看到了，还有3瓶的 Elenta 在他的架上。
They're not there anymore.
那3瓶现在已经不在了。
In here.
我已经把它处理掉了。
So in 2014 was another wine cask wood finish Companta.
那2014年的时候呢，另外一款用葡萄酒橡木桶进行酿造的私藏款发表了，就是 Companta。
I used 2 different types of wine cask.
那这里面我有用到2款不同的葡萄酒桶。
But the main one was a very famous Burgundy vineyard called Clos de Tart.
在比例上高比例的是运用高比例的元素是有运用到法国勃艮第的一个名园叫Clos de Tart 特级葡萄园的红酒桶。
Mr. Murray didn't like this one quite so much.
Jim Murray 先生对这支酒的喜好度好像也不是很高。
Anyway.
这个就再说吧。
He doesn't pay my wages.
所以基本上他也没对比尔博士有什么额外的付出，所以也就算了。
So last year was an experiment I started off about 12 years ago using winter barley.
那去年的时候呢，的酒款是大概在12年前的时候，我开始尝试着用冬麦来当做原始的材料的开始。来打造这一款。
In the Scotch whisky industry, we only use spring barley.
那在苏格兰威士忌、麦芽威士忌产业，普遍用的是春麦
，which will give us higher levels of alcohol.
春麦至少有一个好处，就是它的酒精的出酒率是比较高的。
But I wanted to try winter barley to see if there was any difference in flavor.
那对我来说，我是想试用冬麦，看看最后酒的表现里能不能呈现不一样的风味跟美感。
And the result of the experiment was, yes, there was a little difference in flavor.
那最后的评估出来的成果是，的确是存在着不同，在于一些细微的风味部分。
And now, finally, right now, it's private edition number 7, which is called Milchen.
那当然。进入到了今年，就是第7版的私藏系列，它的名字叫 Milchen。
So the next 2 slides, it just shows you some of the awards these whiskies have won.
接下来的两三张的图表呢，只是让大家分享，跟大家看看这几支酒得了多少奖。
And in fact, my boss, our chief executive, sets me a target each year of winning so many medals and awards.
那基本上呢，我的老板就是格兰杰的总执行长呢，对比尔博士是有设定目标的，每年要得到多少奖。
So lots of pressure on me.
所以这个是有很大的压力的。
So for most of the private edition range, like Sonalta, like Companta, like Artane, I've used this classic technique of buying a particular type of wine barrel, maybe from a vineyard which I liked, maybe because the wine had a particular flavor.
那关于 Sonata 或者是 Artane 跟 Companta 呢，它的概念是去采购优质的葡萄酒桶，而这个葡萄酒桶呢，它的基础是在于有的酒桶的酒之前他所酿的酒是比尔博士喝过，他喜欢，或者他认为这个酒桶的质地跟味道对格兰杰应该是可以提升整个的表现的。
But for the Milshan project, which I started about 5 years ago, I had a slightly different approach.
那关于我们的第7代的私藏系列的 Milshan 呢，它整个的发想跟整个的安排，它的顺序是不一样的。
So, for this one, I sat down and rather than buying different wine barrels, I closed my eyes and I imagined lots of different flavors.
那概念上来说，之前的想法是挑到好桶子，然后进行陈年，然后让它去发展未来有什么样的美味。可是对比尔博士来说 ，Milshan 的开始，它的概念是在于先想一下，在过去格兰杰所有的酒里面，还有什么样的味道是没有被酿出来过的。
I just like that picture because I had lovely long hair.
基本上目前画面上的照片，比尔博士非常喜欢，因为有没有注意到他的头发比较长？
So, to start the project off, I remembered my childhood.
当开始 Milshan 这一支酒5年前要开始发想的时候，比尔博士是回想到他小孩子的时候的记忆。
So when I was a little boy, I was quite badly behaved and I was a very loud child.
那当比尔博士还是小男孩的时候呢，基本上小男孩的时候其实是很吵闹的一个小男孩。
So my grandmother used to look after me.
那在当时来说，大部分的时间是祖母在照顾比尔博士。
And to keep me quiet, she used to fill my face with candy sweets.
为了要比尔博士闭嘴安静所以祖母动不动就拿糖果给他吃，塞满他的嘴巴让他闭嘴。
So that was the flavor profile I had in my mind. All these lovely old-fashioned sweets, like candy, like fudge, like peppermint.
那在当时比尔博士想到的味道，就是小孩子的时候曾经吃到的传统的糖果的滋味，在脑海里就浮现了。
My own particular favorite was the picture right in the middle on the bottom there.
比尔博士个人最喜欢吃的糖果就是中间最下面那一张图，圆圆的，有好几像那个糖果。
They're called flying saucers.
基本上那个叫飞碟糖 ，flying saucer。
And they're made of rice paper.
那它是用rice paper， 就是有点那个米做的那种薄薄的包，就我们有点像那棉花糖那种薄薄的米的制品。
And when you put them in your mouth, the rice paper melts, and they're full of lemon sherbet, which all fizzes in your mouth.
所以那个圆圆像飞碟的那种糖果，它上下片是以米为原料，做的像纸一样，然后里面包的是柠檬冰沙。所以当含在嘴里，那个会化开嘛，上下层会化开，然后整个就散开来，有点类似像汽水糖的口感，它这样在跑。
So that was the flavor profile I wanted to try and create in a Glenmorangie whiskey.
那5年前的那个时候，他想把这个味道做在威士忌里面。
So these gentlemen are the directors of the Scotch Whisky Association.
好，这3个人很重要，因为这是苏格兰威士忌协会的三巨头，3个 director。
So they control the laws which govern the production of Scotch whisky.
那这3位呢，就是决定了苏格兰威士忌所有酿酒规范法令的制定以及控制的人。
So the laws are very strict.
那当然规定就是很清楚、很直接的。
And to make single malt Scotch, we are only allowed to use 3 ingredients.
那当然酿造苏格兰威士忌只允许3个最原始的原料，
which are water, malted barley, and yeast. And that's it.
当然就是水、麦芽跟酵母，就这样了。
So it would have been easy to have bags of candy sweets and fill them into the barrels, but I wouldn't have been allowed to do that.
那当然，为要让威士忌呈现糖果的味道，如果我把一整包的糖果放进酒桶里面，跟酒一起浸润的话，那应该就被禁止不准发表了。
So I had to try and become a little bit creative in how I could try and achieve this flavor.
所以风味的目标已经设定了，那如何要达成它呢？当然就要有一些相对创新的一些做法。
So there's a little clue there. The picture in the top right is a very well-known wine-producing region in Portugal called the Douro Valley.
所以右上角那个图片呢，其实就是一个暗示了哈。这个图片就在告诉大家，Mushon 用的橡木桶的原香是来自于葡萄牙的斗罗河流域的一个红葡萄酒。
Now, about 90% of all Scotch whisky today is matured in barrels which have previously held bourbon or Tennessee whisky.
那目前来说，整个苏格兰麦芽威士忌的比例上来说，有90%的酒是陈年在波本或田纳西威士忌桶里面。
And normally, for bourbon barrels, the inside is given a very heavy char. It's called an alligator char.
那在波本桶的制成来说的话呢，它算是炭烧桶，因为它有用 charring。那这个 charring 的制成呢，也造成了他们在当地有一个讲法叫做鳄鱼 char，alligator char， 就是里面那种裂痕的那种美感。
And the barrels before the heads are put on a gas burner for usually 3 or 4 minutes.
那基本上在上下桶盖封盖之前，经过这个 charring 的制成呢，时间大概是3到4分钟，在美国波本威士忌的新桶。
But for wine barrels, charring doesn't work. It ruins the wine.
那概念上来说，葡萄酒桶的话是不会做炭烧的这个 charring 制成，因为这样子会破坏葡萄酒桶内层的风味。
And wine barrels are toasted, which uses heat rather than naked flame.
所以概念上我们用的是烘烤，而不是炭烧。那而且它不是用火直接在上面烫，而是只是运用热气去造就桶内的颜色跟风味。
And for my Glenmorangie barrels, I also prefer toasting, which penetrates more deeply into the wood and releases gentle flavors.
所以由于做烘烤的动作来说的话，桶子的内缘它的一个结构跟风味的形成呢，它是比较深的，那恰的话是比较薄的，所以对格兰杰的酒来说，比较建议的是用 toast， 然后让那个桶子的风味可以更完整的出现在酒里面，橡木桶的风味可以更清楚的出现在酒里面。
And that's one of the reasons why our first whiskey, Glenmorangie Original, is pale gold in colour.
这也是一个原因呢，造就了格兰杰经典10年的颜色相对是比较淡雅的。
It doesn't seem to be working.
Ready? Wake up.
That's it. So the top slide, I'm sorry, this is a little bit difficult to explain.
基本上现在这个画面在比较不太容易去解释啦。
The top one shows charring, and the char basically burns maybe 1 or 2 millimeters into the barrel.
那大家看到上面那一个是木头的裁片的一个展示。那概念上来说，如果是炭烧 charring 的状况下， 大概能够烧进去的深度大概是1厘米或2厘米的厚度。
So your spirit during maturation can only soak in these 1 or 2 millimeters.
所以如果当我们有新蒸馏出来的酒新酒入桶之后，它酒最多只能舀到2毫米的厚度。
Whereas the toasting, which can take between 2 and 3 hours, penetrates more slowly but much more deeply into the wood, maybe about 5 millimeters.
那概念上来说，如果今天是用 toast 来说，由于它是用热气，不是明火直接去烫，所以呢，它大概会花3个小时的时间去慢慢处理，然后也造就了桶子的内缘呢，它的那个就制造风味跟酒可以咬进去的深度 ，is about 3 to 4 millimeter,
about 5 millimeters
到5毫米那么深，就是一个是2毫米左右。一个是5毫米的一个厚度，是酒可以咬进去的。
So basically, your spirit can soak more into the wood and simply take more flavor.
所以也造就成说，酒质在桶内的时候，如果今天是在法国桶的状况下，它可以让木质本身的风味带更多出来到酒里面。
Now, of course, if I chose to, I could make Glenmorangie Original darker in color.
那当然，如果我挑的是前面的上面的这一个的话，我的酒颜色可以变得很漂亮。
And I could do what most other Scotch whisky brands do and add lots of caramel colouring.
或者我为了满足大家对颜色的喜好，我也可以像其他一些酒厂，基本上视状况的去修正它的颜色。
But I think this is dishonest personally.
那但是对我来说，我不想要这样子做。
And I know that some people in their mind, they think the darker the color is, the better the flavor will be.
当然有些人还是相信说颜色越深的酒应该是比较好的酒的。
But in reality, almost the opposite is true. If it's very, very dark in color, it's usually because there's been lots of coloring added to it.
那基本上呢，蛮普遍的。你看到颜色很深的威士忌的时候，应该非常高的可能性是用色素焦糖去修正的。
So I like our whiskies to be natural and pure, the way they're supposed to be.
那我希望我的威士忌呈现出来是自然的，然后呢，很宜人的一种表现。
So I know you'll all be very familiar with the taste of Glenmorangie Original.
我相信在座的朋友应该对左手边第一杯的经典格兰杰是相当熟悉的。
But let's just remind ourselves of what a lovely, fresh, clean tasting whiskey this is.
那还是邀请大家，等于是回忆或唤醒对格兰杰经典10年的纯净清新的感觉。
This whiskey is very personal to me.
这一款酒对我来说，个人有一些意义在的。
For 2 reasons.
这里面有2个原因。
Firstly, way back in 1984, when I was a young 24-year-old man, I tasted malt whiskey for the first time.
那时间必须回到1984年，那一年我24岁，我人生中的第一杯麦芽威士忌就是格兰杰10年。
I'm not sure what age that makes me now. I can't really remember. I can't count.
基本上呢，即使这样说了，我还是记不起来我今年几岁。
But this was the first. It was Glenmorangie 10-year-old. So this was the very first whiskey I ever tasted.
所以这个就是我人生的第一款麦芽威士忌。
And the second reason is this is the favorite whiskey of my mother.
那对我来说，第2个重要的意义就是格兰杰经典10年，也是我妈妈这辈子一直以来最喜欢的一款酒。
But my mother's 84 years old.
我妈妈今年84岁了。
And once each year, I try to give my mother a glass of Ardbeg, but she just doesn't like it.
这几年来呢，每年我都会试着找个机会让我妈妈试试看阿贝，可是到目前为止她都不喜欢阿贝。
So this is lovely fresh bouquet of herbs, of flowers, of fruits.
所以大家来问问看，格兰杰今年10年呢，今天的状态其实算是苏格兰的夏天的状况。所以你问问看，可以很标准的呈现清新感，然后水果花香的调性都非常的清楚。
And if you take a sip, the texture is always very soft and silky.
那大家可以含一小口来感受它的口感，非常的柔软的调性，带着丝绢般的那个滑顺轻柔感。
Nice flavors of vanilla, of peach, of citrus fruit, of coconut, of almond.
所以非常细致宜人的风味，甜美的感觉，像香草，或者像水蜜桃，像柑橘，然后也会想起椰子，然后最后一个 coconut， 然后再过来杏仁。
Thank you. And the other reason why I wanted us to taste this today is because the original is the base of nearly all my other whiskies. Most of them start off their life as original.
那概念上为什么一定要品尝这一杯呢？是因为它是格兰杰酒厂的旗舰款，而且绝大多数格兰杰的酒款，它的开始，它后面的持续的酿造之前都是由这支酒开始的。
Now, just before I explain how I made Milshin, we have a second whiskey to taste, and I'm sure you can tell from the colour, which is like rosé wine, that this is Glenmorangie Quinta Ruban.
那在我说明 Milshin 之前呢，我们中间还有一杯，大家可以先拿起来看看，它的颜色已经可以呈现出非常美好的玫瑰金或者是淡淡的粉红色调。这一杯就是格兰杰的 Quinta Ruban。
So basically, to make this whiskey, I buy barrels from Portugal, which have previously held ruby port wine.
所以Quinta Ruban 用的波特桶呢是红宝石波特桶 Ruby Port。
I buy them from a cooperage in Oporto called the Dias Family Cooperage.
那我们这个桶子是由 Oporto 市的so the family name called Dias 家族的那个桶商帮我们挑选，然后再运送到苏格兰使用的。Dias 这个桶商帮忙挑的。
And Quinta Ruban is essentially Glenmorangie Original, which has then been aged for a further 2 years in these casks.
所以Quinta Ruban 的话就是前面的10年就是今年格兰杰的原酒，然后再换到了红宝石波特2年。就成就了这一款酒质的一个调性。
So it's richer, it's deeper, it's more intense.
所以更加的厚重、深沉，而且饱满的滋味。
Top notes that make me think of herbs or of sandalwood.
那轻质的香气的部分，就是 top note 的部分，就是一些herb， 就是绿色的青草香料青草系的味道。然后再加上herbs and
sandalwood，
然后还有那个杉木雪松木的味道。
You know, sandalwood is a bit like if you have an incense candle and burn that. It's that sort of smell.
就是有点类似像那个古早的那种蜡烛的那种气味。
If any of you have ever visited a Roman Catholic church or cathedral in Europe, when you go into these churches, you always get the smell of the incense candles.
那基本上，如果你有机会去欧洲游玩的时候，走进人家他们的老教堂里面，其实老教堂里面的气味就是走这样的一个感觉。
But there's something deeper underneath this, maybe a bit of chocolate, maybe a bit of mint.
那当大家再多摇晃几下之后，相对比较深沉或者讲说比较厚重华丽的气味就会开始跑出来了。那这里面你可能会想到的是黑巧克力的味道，当然有一些相对成熟华丽的水果味。
This is 46% alcohol. It's non-chill filtered, so you get that nice mouth-coating texture.
那当大家一起来品饮的时候呢，由于Quinta Ruban 是46度的 single malt， 酒精浓度在46度， 所以它相对在味蕾间会呈现相对清楚而明显的包覆感。
And the flavors remind me of prunes, of dark chocolate, of mint, and of orange.
所以这风味上来说的话，会想起薄荷、黑巧克力，然后还有黑莓跟柳橙。
Now,
就是梅子。
Now later on this evening, I might light up a nice cigar.
对，当品尝了 Kinta Ruben， 比尔博士就会想起会忍不住点起一支很好的古巴雪茄或高品质的雪茄一起来搭配。
I'm not sure it's raining outside and I won't be allowed to smoke it in my hotel room at the Grand Hyatt.
那由于外面在下雨，我不确定我能不能被允许在我的君悦饭店的房间里点起来。
However, if I do smoke a cigar, I won't drink original. I'll maybe drink Kinta Ruban with it.
如果今天要抽一支好雪茄的话，对我而言，10年经典跟 Kinta Ruben， 我会想要搭配的是 Kinta Ruben。
So, for private edition number 7, the Milshin, once again my base whiskey was essentially Glenmorangie Original.
所以当我们现在一起来聊 Milshin 的时候呢，它酒质的开始前面10年一样，就是经典10年的原酒。
So, to try and get the flavors I wanted, I had many different ideas.
所以在开始的时候，其实我还有蛮多的想法的。
But eventually, I managed to persuade Mario Diaz, who has the cooperage in Portugal, to carry out a silly experiment for me.
那概念上呢，在过程当中也有请葡萄牙的那一位统商 Mario Diaz 先生，依照比尔博士的想法，协助去尝试了一些试作品。
Now, apologies, this is a very complicated slide.
基本上呢，现在这个画面来说是相对是很复杂的。
Basically, it's the bottom row you want to look at.
那基本上大家最想看到的讯息是最下面第3排的讯息。
I had some wine barrels, 269 in total, sent from the Douro Valley down to the Diaz cooperage.
那在一开始的时候呢，我总共有279个葡萄牙红酒桶，来自于斗罗河的酒庄，被送到了 Diaz 的这个桶商这里 ，Mario Diaz 先生这里。
So these barrels contained red table wine from the Douro Valley.
所以这279个桶子就是葡萄牙斗罗河的红酒桶。
Now, I didn't particularly want to use Douro Valley wine. It didn't really matter, but it had to be somewhere close to the Diaz cooperage.
那其实当初也没有刻意说一定要是斗罗河流域的红酒桶，但是呢，Diaz 的桶商呢，我们的想法就是桶子尽量要维持新鲜的，尽快的送到桶商那一边，所以才选择斗罗河区的红酒桶。
So these are examples of barrel staves which have contained red wine.
那目前博士手上拿的这一块桶片呢，这大家桌上现在的这一片就是斗罗河红酒桶的裁片，就是一开始是这个样子的状态。
Now the wine here is all dried into the wood.
但是呢，大家现场的这个桶片呢，基本上都已经干掉了，液态酒都已经挥发掉了。
But when my barrels arrived at his cooperage, they were still moist and dripping wet with the residue of the wine.
但是当时这279个桶子送到桶商那一边的时候呢，其实里面都还是湿湿的，甚至会有酒液滴下来的状况。
So I asked Mario to knock the heads off the barrels and re-toast them while they were still moist with the wine.
那在当时呢，比尔博士就要求 Mario 先生把桶子的上下盖拿掉，然后再次的烘烤这个桶子，然后让里面的酒液呢慢慢的收干。
And basically the re-toasting concentrated up the wine and caramelized all of the sugars onto the inside of the barrel.
而在再次 retoast 再次烘烤的过程里面呢，它就让原来在桶子内板的酒液被收缩干的同时，也产生了结晶，而这个结晶包含了酒的风味以及微量糖分的结晶。
So we've tried to recreate that process here tonight by putting the staves with wine into an oven.
所以呢，我们今天在现场呢，我们台湾团队试着重现那一个结晶的现象，所以我们把这个木片呢，昨天晚上就泡在托盘，然后让木片去吃葡萄牙红酒，然后今天刚刚才拿来烤，然后看结晶状况。
Now be careful because these staves are still red hot. They're right out the oven.
记住因为是很烫的哈，所以现在木片还有点烫，要小心啦。
But you can see that the crystals of sugar are starting to coat the inside of the barrel.
所以大家可以很清楚的如果仔细看哈，你可以看到它的结晶状况。记住哦，不是这样正面看，是要这样子。这样子来看，你就会看到一闪一闪亮晶晶在上面的结晶。
And when I shone my torch into the barrels, I could see all the crystals of sugar glistening on the inside.
所以当这279个桶子再烘烤完成，然后上下盖又把它封好，送到格兰杰的时候，比尔博士会拿手电筒去照每一个桶子，那他感觉到里面结晶的状态是符合他的期待的。有那个糖分跟一些果酸果味的结晶。
So that was my crazy idea to try and get this candy sweetness flavor into my whiskey.
这个制成来说的话呢，就是我的发想，想要试着在我的威士忌里面制造出糖果风味的一个基础。
So Mario Diaz was the only person who agreed to try this.
那基本上所有的桶商里面，只有葡萄牙这位 Mario Diaz 先生是愿意配合比尔博士把葡萄酒桶再烘烤的一个桶商。
I asked my cooperage in Kentucky where I get my barrels to do it, and they just laughed at me.
那在美国肯塔基州也有我们的橡木桶供应商，比尔博士也有跟他要求过，结果对方是嘲笑他。
I asked the cooperage in France who supplies my Sauterne casks, and they just said no and hung up.
那在法国的波尔多区，我们也有橡木桶供应商。那因为我们有束带桶嘛，哈。那当比尔博士打过去给他的时候，他们直接就是回绝 no， 然后就把电话挂掉了。
So that's why I used wine barrels from the Douro Valley. The wine didn't really matter. I just wanted someone who was going to caramelize it onto the inside of the wood.
所以呢，基本上